I don't introduce myself as a hero. I'm a veteran, that's it. A man with a back that clicks when the weather changes, and a memory that still flinches at sudden metallic sounds, like a shovel hitting frozen stone. Debaltseve. People say the name now like it's a chapter in a history book. But back then it was a living city with smoke coming from chimneys, dogs running between courtyards, and railway tracks stretching out like veins. A rail hub. A knot. And in war, knots get pulled tight until something snaps. When we arrived, nobody gave us a clean speech about glory. We got a map with lines drawn in a shaky marker and an order that sounded simple. Hold. Hold what? Streets that changed hands by the hour, basements turned into shelters, a school that still had children's drawings on the walls while we stacked sandbags in the hallway and listened for the whistle that meant incoming. The early days of defending the city felt almost organized. That's the lie your brain tells you so you can keep moving. We dug positions where the ground was half ice, half black mud. We learned the sound of different artillery like some sick kind of music education. We learned that quiet doesn't mean safe. It just means the next thing hasn't started yet. And we trusted our commanders at first. Why wouldn't we? You're trained to. You're taught the chain is everything. Then the chain started to rust. They told us, you're not surrounded. They told us, a corridor is open. They told us, reinforcements are on the way. They told us, rotation tomorrow. Tomorrow became a joke we stopped laughing at. We'd come back from night shifts with our hands numb, our faces stung raw by wind, and we'd ask, so, what's the plan? And someone, always someone with a warm office and clean boots, would answer with words that sounded confident and meant nothing. Meanwhile, the reality tightened around us. You'd stand on a ruined stairwell and see the city as a broken chessboard. Burned-out cars, shattered windows, snow-stained gray, and the distant flashes that meant the line was moving again. There were moments that still sit in my throat, like the old woman who refused to leave her apartment because her husband was buried in the courtyard and he'll be alone. We carried her anyway, gently but fast, because you don't argue with a mortar timer. I remember her hands clutching a plastic bag with 3 things inside: a photograph, a loaf of hard bread, and a small cross. Like the young guy from my unit, barely a man, who kept whispering, "I'm fine," while his leg bled through a tourniquet that we'd tightened until the skin around it went pale. He was fine right up until he wasn't. That's what war does. It turns words into broken tools. And yet, listen, there was also something else. Something stubborn and bright. Because even while our commanders fed us false hope, we were learning to survive on what was real. Each other, small routines, shared cigarettes, jokes that sounded cruel because humor is how you keep your spine straight when everything tries to bend it. And help started arriving. Not in the way people imagine, no magical parade of shiny weapons saving the day, but in pieces, in quiet deliveries, in changes you noticed only because you'd been living without them. Better tourniquets, medical kits that actually made sense, radios that didn't die after one cold night, warm layers that didn't feel like wet cardboard, optics that let you see shapes in the dark instead of guessing. Some of it came from America, some from Europe, some through volunteers who looked like accountants and students, but moved with the urgency of people who decided this matters. The first time I held decent equipment in my hands, I remember thinking 2 opposite things at once. Thank God. Why did it take so long? Because we had been defending with whatever we could scrape together. Old gear, patched vests, luck stitched into every pocket. And suddenly there were signs that the world had noticed us bleeding in the snow. Not enough to stop everything, but enough that you could feel the difference between being abandoned and being supported. Still, support doesn't fix lies. The worst part wasn't the cold or the hunger or even the shelling. It was the feeling that the people above us were saving their own reputations while we spent our lives like loose change. I remember one briefing in particular. A commander stood over a map and said calmly, "We hold this sector. We have control. You will be relieved soon." I looked around at the guys beside me, faces black with soot, eyes red from no sleep, and I thought, he's either blind or he thinks we're stupid. That night we heard the enemy pushing harder on the flanks. The sound wasn't just explosions, it was movement. You learned to feel it, a pressure shift, like a storm changing direction. And in the dark we started hearing rumors. Not from the top, never from the top, but from passing units, from intercepted chatter, from the way medevac routes got temporarily adjusted until temporarily started to sound permanent. One of the older soldiers in our position said very quietly, "They're going to leave us here." Nobody answered him, not because we disagreed, because saying it out loud would make it real. The last thing I'll tell you in this first part is this. We didn't hold Debaltseve because we believed the speeches. We held it because the man next to you was holding it too. Because leaving would mean the enemy walks through your country like it's a hallway. Because even when you're lied to, you still know what's yours. And right before everything went wrong, right before the moment that split my life into before and after, I remember thinking, if they're lying this much, it means the truth is worse than we can imagine. That was Debaltseve, a knot pulled tight. It happened the way a lot of bad things happen in war, not with a grand moment, but with a chain of small failures that suddenly becomes a trap. 1 hour we still had a route, a rhythm, a sense of we can hold until dark. The next hour the radio was a mess, half orders, half silence, and the map in our heads stopped matching the streets in front of us. We were moving between positions when the world cracked open. Not poetry, just reality. A burst of fire, a shout that didn't sound like ours, and then that heavy, cold feeling in your stomach that says, "You're not the hunter anymore." "Down! Face down!" someone screamed. Russian accents, harsh and confident, like they'd practiced this line in a mirror. A boot pressed into my shoulder blade. My cheek hit frozen grit. My hands were yanked back and zip-tied so tight my fingers went numb. Someone laughed right above my ear, and I remember that laugh more clearly than the sky. Then a bag over my head. The world turned into damp fabric and breath I couldn't control. They dragged me like a sack, bumping me into door frames on purpose, making a joke out of every stumble. "Ukrainian hero," one of them spat, mocking, like the words tasted funny. "Now you're quiet, yeah?" In the back of a vehicle, the bag came off for a second, just enough for me to see other guys, our guys, faces gray with shock, wrists bound, eyes fixed on nothing, because looking at the wrong thing could be punished. Then the bag went back on, and I was back in that private darkness where your brain tries to solve a problem it doesn't have the tools for.
They took everything. Phone, documents, patches, even the little things you don't think matter until you're stripped down to prisoner. One of them found a folded photo in my pocket. My mother, years ago, smiling like the world was normal. He held it up like it was evidence of a crime.
"Aww,"
He said, loud for the others to hear.
"Look, Mama's boy."
Then came the room. I don't know where it was. Basement, storage building, somebody's office turned into a cage. It smelled like damp concrete and old smoke. The light was always wrong, either too bright, meant to make you squint, or too dim, meant to make you guess. The interrogations weren't one big scene.
They were a loop. Same questions, different voices, the same cheap psychology. Unit, commander, positions, radio frequencies. Who's supplying you? Where do the weapons come from? When I said, I don't know, they smiled like I told them a joke. When I stayed silent, they acted offended, as if I owed them manners. They called us names constantly, like language was another weapon. They talked about Ukraine like it was a mistake that could be corrected with enough violence. They spoke with that greasy confidence of men who think power makes them right. And hunger. Hunger was part of the method. At first you tell yourself it's temporary. Then your stomach stops being a stomach and becomes a loud animal that lives inside you. They fed us just enough to keep us standing, not enough to keep us human. Thin soup that tasted like warm metal. A chunk of bread you'd swear was older than the building. Water that arrived when they felt like it. They wanted you weak. Weak people are easier to shape. Sometimes they'd bring food in and eat it slowly in front of us, talking with full mouths, laughing, making little comments like, "You want? Say something useful." I watched strong men, men who'd carried wounded friends through fire, start to tremble just from the effort of staying calm.
I learned quickly, don't give them your fear. They drink it. The worst part was the uncertainty. Days without light, nights without sleep. You stop trusting time. You start measuring your life by footsteps in the corridor. Those steps mean interrogation. Those steps mean they're taking someone away. Those steps mean it might be my turn. But here's the thing they didn't understand. They could starve the body. They could try to break the mind. But there's a kind of stubbornness Ukrainians grow like muscle. Quiet, ugly, unromantic stubbornness. It's not slogans. It's simply refusing to hand over the last piece of yourself. So I made rules in my head. Don't memorize their faces like they own your future. Breathe slow. Answer only what keeps others safe. Stay alive. Then one night, or what I think was night, something changed. The building shook from distant blasts, not close enough to kill us, but close enough to remind everyone that the front doesn't care about walls. The guards got louder, more nervous. You could hear them arguing outside the door, their voices sharper than before. A different group came in. New boots. New smell of cold air. They pulled two of us up and said we were being moved. Moved where? They didn't say. They didn't need to. They tied our hands again and marched us out. That moment, stepping from stale concrete into winter air, hit me like a slap. I breathed so hard my lungs hurt. The sky was dark and wide and completely indifferent, and for a second I remembered what it felt like to be a person instead of a problem. They shoved us into the back of a truck. No seats, just metal and a tarp. The engine started. We rolled. I counted turns by feeling. Left, right, long straight, then a slowdown, another stop, voices outside. A door opened somewhere. A flashlight beam cut through the tarp for a second, then vanished. And right then, in all that chaos, nervous guards, shifting vehicles, distant explosions, something small happened that saved my life. One of the ties on my wrists wasn't perfect. Not loose, not generous, just not perfect. Whoever tied it did it fast, hands shaking or rushing. The plastic bit into skin, but there was a tiny gap. I didn't snap it like in movies. I worked it slowly, painfully, millimeter by millimeter, using the edge of a metal seam under the tarp. Every movement felt loud. Every breath felt like it could be heard outside. The truck jolted. A shout. Another jolt. The guards arguing again, louder now. The vehicle lurched forward.
then stopped hard. That moment of impact gave me exactly what I needed: cover, noise, confusion. I pulled my hands free, kept them behind me like nothing changed, and waited. When the tarp shifted and cold air rushed in, when someone climbed up, half looking, half not, I moved like an animal that knows it has one chance. Not a fight, not a hero scene, just a drop off the side into darkness, into snow, into silence. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and didn't breathe for a second. I stayed flat, face in the snow, listening. Shouting. Behind me. Boots. A flashlight beam sweeping the road. Someone swore loudly, angry and embarrassed. I didn't run right away. Running gets you killed. I crawled, slow, into a ditch, under brush that scratched my face. Snow packed into my collar. My heart punched my ribs like it wanted out. The beam passed over the ditch once, twice. Then it moved on. I waited until my lungs burned and my legs went numb and the world felt unreal. Then I started moving again, quietly, away from the road, toward the only direction that mattered. Not back to them. I didn't know where I was. I didn't have a map. I had frozen hands, an empty stomach, and a single thought that kept repeating like a prayer. If I die out here, at least I die free.
And somewhere ahead, far off, there were sounds that could have been anything, but I chose to believe they were ours. The first thing you learn when you escape is that freedom isn't a warm blanket. It's just space. Cold space. Dangerous space. I lay in that ditch for so long my thoughts started to slow down, like my brain was trying to save battery. My wrists burned where the ties had cut in. My fingers were stiff. My mouth was so dry my tongue felt like cloth. And my stomach was empty in a way that felt personal. I didn't have a plan. I had instincts and one rule: don't go where roads go. Roads mean people. People mean questions. Questions mean you end up with a bag over your head again. So I moved like a shadow that didn't trust itself. Crawl. Stop. Listen. Crawled again. Every sound became a threat. A branch snapping could have been wind, or a boot. A dog barking in the distance could have been a yard dog or a patrol dog. The sky was low and starless, and I kept looking up anyway, like it owed me directions. After a while, my legs started shaking from cold and stress. Not dramatic shaking, just that ugly, involuntary tremble that tells you your body is losing the argument. I found a shallow tree line and pushed deeper into it, using the trunks as cover. The snow there was less disturbed, softer, and that was another problem. It held footprints like a confession. So I stepped where I could, over frozen roots, in old animal tracks, on patches where wind had hardened the surface. I tried to walk broken, like a drunk zigzag, because a straight line screams human. Time stopped being time. It became a series of decisions. Left or right, fast or quiet, hide or risk it. At some point I saw the glow of cigarettes through trees, 2 or 3 small orange sparks. Guards. Not the Russians as an idea, not politics, not flags, just armed men in the dark who would drag me back if they found me. I dropped flat behind a fallen log and watched them through branches. They were talking and laughing in that loose, bored way people do when they feel safe. One of them shone a flashlight over the snow like he was sweeping a room, slow and lazy, not expecting anything. The beam passed within a few meters of me. I held my breath so hard it hurt. Then the flashlight moved on, and the sparks drifted away through the trees.
That was the moment I understood something simple. They didn't think I could escape. Not really. They were searching because they had to, not because they believed they'd find me. That arrogance saved me. But the cold didn't care about arrogance. The cold was honest. I kept moving until my feet stopped feeling like feet. Every step felt like walking on someone else's limbs. I started stumbling, and stumbling is loud, and loud gets you killed. So I forced myself to slow down and become patient. The way you become patient when you have no choice. I found a half-collapsed shed or storage hut, just boards and a slanted roof. It wasn't safe, but it was less visible. Inside, it smelled like old hay and oil. There was a corner where the wind didn't cut as hard. I sat there and did something humiliating. I dug in my pocket for crumbs that didn't exist. Then I remembered the soup, the bread, the way they'd eaten in front of us. My anger rose hot, and anger is good for about 10 seconds, and then it drains you. So I did the only thing that worked. I turned anger into counting. In my head, I repeated a rhythm: step, breathe, listen. Because rhythm keeps panic from taking the wheel. Sometime later, the sky lightened into that gray dawn that makes everything look dead and honest. That was dangerous too. Darkness hides you. Daylight shows you. I waited until I heard less movement, fewer engines, fewer voices. Then I moved again, staying low, keeping to broken ground. The landscape around Debaltseve didn't have safe places. It had degrees of exposed. I crossed a field that looked empty, always the worst kind of field, by going in short bursts. 10 seconds, drop, listen. 10 seconds, drop. Halfway across, I saw it. A line of fresh tire tracks, and beyond it, a small group of men near a vehicle. They weren't close enough to recognize faces, but I saw rifles, and I saw the posture, relaxed, casual. Not us. I sank into the snow and made myself smaller than my own fear. My heart beat so loud I was sure they could hear it. One of them lifted a flashlight, yes, in daylight, because some people are that paranoid, and swept it across the field. The beam hit the snow near me, just grazing. I didn't move. A second passed. 2. Then the beam drifted away. I stayed down until my muscles cramped. When I finally crawled backward, slow, careful, I felt the edge of panic try to pull me into a run. A run would have been my end. So I forced myself to stay ugly and slow and alive. After that, I made a decision I hated. I needed help. Not help like Hollywood. Just a human being who wouldn't hand me over. I watched a small village from the edge of cover, smoke from a chimney, a fence line, a narrow path with footprints. I waited until I saw someone alone, an older man carrying something heavy, moving like every step had a story. I stepped out just enough for him to see me without making him scream. He froze. I raised my empty hands, palms out. My voice came out cracked, barely a voice at all. "Brother, I'm Ukrainian. Please." He stared at my uniform, dirty, torn, stripped of anything useful, then at my hands, then back at my face. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired you see in civilians who've had their normal life stolen. He didn't say hero. He didn't cry. He just looked around once, quick, like a man counting dangers, and then he made a small motion with his head. "Come," he said quietly. "Fast." He brought me behind a shed, pushed a cup into my hands. The water was cold, but it felt like medicine. Then, God, he gave me a piece of bread.
Not much. But bread can be an entire universe when you've been kept hungry on purpose. I ate too fast, and it hurt. He slapped my shoulder lightly, not unkind. "Slow," he whispered. He asked no questions at first.
That told me everything. He understood the rules of surviving near a front line. Only after I could breathe again did he speak. "You from where?" he asked. "Debaltseve," I said. My voice cracked on the word. He nodded like he'd already guessed. He didn't give me a map. He gave me something better. Direction. He pointed with 2 fingers, not one. Habit, as if pointing with 1 finger might tempt fate. "Go there. Not road. Follow trees. You will hear your side. If you hear Russian shouting, lie down. If you hear engines, hide. If you hear dogs, do not move." He paused, eyes on mine. "And if they catch you again," he added, not dramatic, just real, "they will not forgive escape." I nodded. I didn't say thank you the normal way. I said it the way soldiers say it, because we don't waste words when words can shake. "I owe you." He shrugged like debt didn't matter anymore. "Just live," he said. I left with my body warmer and my fear sharper, because now I had something to lose again. Hours later, I don't know how many, I started hearing a different sound. Not laughter, not confident voices, not that sloppy cruelty. Short commands, controlled movement, a drone buzzed somewhere far above. The discipline of people who are alert because they expect to fight, not because they enjoy power. I dropped to my knees behind brush and called out, quiet, careful, using the kind of phrases we used so we wouldn't shoot each other in confusion. "Ukrainian! Don't shoot! I'm Ukrainian!" A voice answered from somewhere I couldn't see. "Hands! Show hands!" I raised them high. My arms shook. "Walk forward. Slow." I stepped down. The world felt unreal. I expected a rifle butt, a shove, something rough, because my body still lived in captivity.
Instead, a soldier in muddy gear stepped close, eyes hard, but not cruel. He looked me over like a medic looks over a wound, fast, practiced. "Name?" he asked. I said it. He nodded once, then his face changed, just a little, like he'd been holding a breath and finally let it out. "Holy hell," he muttered. "You're alive." That's when I almost collapsed, not from weakness, but from relief. Because until that moment, a part of me didn't fully believe I would make it. People think the last part of a war story is a battle. It's not. The last part is what you do when there's no immediate enemy in front of you, when the gunfire is farther away, but your body still lives like it's under a boot. After Debaltseve, I didn't become one of those men who came back and snapped into normal life. I came back like a broken tool that still works if you force it. They moved me between units for a while. Medical checks, paperwork, more questions. Everyone wanted to know what the Russians asked, what they knew, what I said. Some asked professionally. Some asked like they were hungry for a story. Those ones made my skin crawl. And the truth about our command, about the lies, kept unfolding in ugly little confirmations. Someone would say, orders got delayed. Someone else would say, there was confusion. Then you'd hear, they didn't want panic. And finally, the sentence nobody wanted to admit. They sacrificed the line to save the narrative. I stopped expecting justice from commanders who never froze in the open. I stopped expecting clean explanations. War isn't clean, and the people who talk about it the cleanest are usually the farthest from it. What I did see, slowly, over months and then years, was the difference between being given words and being given tools. America and Europe kept helping, not as some magical shield, but as the hard, unromantic kind of support that changes what's possible.
Training, supplies, communications, medicine, systems.
Things that keep men alive long enough to become veterans. People argue politics like it's a sport. Soldiers don't. Soldiers count outcomes. A better tourniquet is a life. A working radio is a life. A drone that spots an ambush first is a life. A battery that doesn't die in the cold is a life. So yes, I'm grateful. I'm also bitter, because I can't stop seeing faces that would still be here if help, truth, and preparation had arrived earlier. And the Russians? I don't paint them as monsters because it's convenient. I paint them as monsters because I met the kind that enjoys the job. In captivity, they didn't just want information. They wanted humiliation. They wanted you to feel small. They wanted to grind you into a shape that fit their story. Ukraine is nothing. You are nothing. We own the future. Their cruelty wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was boredom. The casual way they withheld food. The way they woke you just to keep you tired. The way they treated suffering like entertainment. You don't forget that. But here is something I learned the hard way. If you carry hatred like a backpack forever, it bends your spine. It makes you live as if you're still chained to the people you escaped. So I had to decide what kind of man I would be after. I could have stayed in that dark place mentally, always waiting for footsteps, always ready to bite, always hungry, even at a full table. Or I could build something that the war couldn't take. My decision didn't happen in one heroic moment. It happened in a kitchen, actually. Quiet, ordinary. The kind of place war veterans sometimes fear because ordinary life feels unreal. A friend invited me over, not to celebrate, just to eat. He put a plate in front of me, simple food, and I stared at it like it was a test. My hands were shaking again. I tried to hide it under the table. He noticed anyway. He didn't say, "It will be okay." That sentence is useless. He just said, "Eat slow. You're safe here." Safe. That word made my throat tighten. I took one bite, then another. And then, without warning, I started crying. Not the dramatic kind, not the movie kind. Just silent tears I couldn't stop. My body finally letting out something it had been clenching for too long. I hated myself for it for about 3 seconds. Then I realized, crying meant I was still human. It meant they didn't turn me into stone. That night, I made my decision. Not a decision about revenge, not even a decision about staying in uniform forever. A decision about truth. I decided I would stop letting lies control me, whether they came from enemy interrogators or from my own commanders. So I started speaking honestly when I could. To younger guys, to volunteers, sometimes to journalists if they weren't fishing for cheap drama. I told them what it felt like when tomorrow becomes a weapon. I told them what hunger does to a man. I told them how captivity doesn't end at the gate. And when someone romanticized the war, I corrected them, quietly but firmly. When someone said, "It's all politics," I said, "No, it's people." I also made another decision, even harder. I stopped punishing myself for surviving. Because I carried guilt like a second uniform. Guilt that I walked out while others didn't. Guilt that I ate bread while someone else stayed hungry. Guilt that my lungs still filled with air. But guilt doesn't bring anyone back. It only keeps the living trapped. So I found ways to honor the dead that actually mattered. Helping families, raising money when I could, mentoring the new guys so they didn't walk into the same lies unprepared. You want to know the most brutal truth?
I still hear that laughter sometimes. The one above my ear, back when the bag went over my head. I still wake up some nights and have to touch the wall to remind myself where I am.
But I also remember the older man in the village who gave me bread and water with shaking hands and said, "Just live." That's the sentence that carried me farther than any slogan. Debaltseve didn't make me a legend. It made me a witness. And if I have one last thing to say, one thing that is mine, not from propaganda, not from commanders, not from television, it's this. We defended our city in the early days with almost nothing but stubbornness and each other. We were lied to by people who thought maps mattered more than men. We were helped by strangers across oceans who sent tools instead of pity. I was captured by people who tried to break my name into dust, and I escaped not because I was fearless, but because I refused to give them the last piece of myself. I'm a veteran now, not a symbol. Just a man who came back carrying war inside him and still chose, every day, to stay human.